So with that little thing taken care of, I invite Pinay to come over and open the proceedings for us.
Kia ora tātou. Mrs. Gunn and I go back a long time. We started together at Gender and Women's Studies at 18KP. Me inoi tātou. He honore, he kororia ki te atua, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Whakamaimiti tonu atu ki a koe a ihua, mo ai mana ki tana i a mātou katoa. Me a mātou tamariki mo ka puna anō hoki. Kia aroha mai hoki koe ki o mātou henga, noi kore tana, whakapūmautia mai tō aroha nui ki a mātou katoa. Tēnei ka inu atu i runga i te ingoa o te matua te tama, o te wairua tapu, kororea ki tō ingoa tapu, āmene. Kia ora tātou, he mihi mai oha, he mihi aroha tēnei, kia koutou i hui mai nei i tēnei pō. Kia koutou nā maunga whakahei, nā māta waka no nā haue whā, tēnei te karanga o ahumairangi te maunga, where am I? I'm here. Ahumairangi te maunga, awa kairangi te awa, me te whānau o akapai kia koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, piki mai rā. Nā tātou te whānau o akapai i torohia nā ringa manaaki kia koutou katoa. He rea wairua mai nā matai kei rungi i a koutou mā, kia mihia, kia tangihia, he tino hona rea rātou mā kua naro ki te karanga o hinenu te pō. Haere atu rā ki te ao ko atu, ki a rātou mā, i pōhere mai rā i a koutou, haere, haere, haere atu rā. I raurangatira mā, nau mai ki roto i te poho o tēnei whare, I raro i te manaakitanga o tō tātou kaihanga, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai rā. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui. Talo whalawa, malo alelei, ki o rāna, and in honour of the heritage language of our speaker today, benvenuti a tutti and buonasera. I'm Carmen Dalli, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education. I'm just delighted to be welcoming you today to our public lecture. I do hope that you will be able to join us afterwards for some refreshments, and I'm looking forward to speaking to as many of you as possible. The Faculty of Education has a proud tradition of research and teaching excellence, and our annual lecture series is our way of showcasing some of this excellence. Our scholars are committed to improving educational outcomes and the life chances of Akonga across the lifespan, from early childhood to higher education. They study education as an institution, they research learning and its psychological underpinnings, they teach students to become teachers, and they influence educational policy and practice in this country and internationally. In this work, our scholars engage with a wide range of subjects, from the teaching of languages, sciences, te reo Māori, maths and physical education, to curriculum theory and use of AI in education, from neurodiversity and differentiated learning to leadership and coaching in educational settings, or, in the case of our speaker tonight, Dr. Lisa Terreni, the place of visual arts in education and the way that art intertwines with pedagogy. Dr. Terreni has called her lecture Into the Light. stories from the Education, Art and Ceramics collections. The lecture is based on Lisa's recent research into the art and ceramics collections maintained by the Faculty of Education and first established by Wellington Teachers College, later known as the Wellington College of Education. I have had the privilege of hearing Lisa speak about her research on other occasions before today, so I know this will be a fascinating and deeply engaging lecture, delivered with Lisa's characteristic verve, energy, and lots of humor. But there is also another reason why I'm looking forward to tonight's lecture. This year marks 20 years since the establishment of the Faculty of Education through the coming together of the staff of Wellington College of Education and the staff of the School of Education at Victoria University of Wellington. It is also the last year that the faculty will be a standalone faculty before it combines with the Faculty of Health and the School of Psychology at the beginning of 2025. So this lecture is also timely because it gives us the chance to tell and listen to some narratives from our history. If you like, a tribute to the past that reminds us of the richness of the legacy we carry forward into the next chapter of our story. I'm very much looking forward to Lisa's lecture. Please join me in welcoming Lisa to the podium.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for that very warm welcome, Carmen. And it is an honour and a privilege to be able to present this research. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and actually I know that there are many of you in the room who also share this passion and interest in the arts collection that we are very, very lucky to still own. So let's start from the beginning, into the light.
She's on to it.
Yeah. I'm going to start with a whakatauki that I think is really important in terms of what I'm going to present about today. Te toi whakairo, ka ihi, ka wehi, ka awe te o katoa. Artistic excellence makes the world sit up and wonder. And certainly, when I think about this collection and the things that are in this collection, I feel an enormous amount of wonder at what we've managed to collect in the lifetime of our history as a teaching institution. This is an important work for me because it represents a lot of the work that we continue to do in the faculty around Māori art and Māori pūrākau, and I want to pay tribute to two people who were involved in this. Kiri Ka, who was hugely important in the advocacy of the arts at the College of Education, and also Bruce Wilson, who was the head of the art department at the time that this work was created in 1982, both of whom have now passed on. So a tribute to them. As Carmen alluded to, I'm going to look at the arts and ceramics collections that were established at Wellington Teachers College probably in the 1940s and the 50s. I'm going to tell some of the stories that are attached to the pieces and look at maybe some of the artists who made these works, as well as the educational practices that supported the development of this collection and what this could perhaps mean for the future, as Carmen suggests. I want to first of all talk about nostalgia. And I was lucky when I began this research that my colleague Bronwyn Wood said, oh, you might like this quote from a woman who we used to work with actually at the Faculty of Education, Catherine Manataonga, and her colleagues, and they say, we believe there is a necessary place for nostalgia because we hold to participatory and democratic workplace goals that have been shaped by the past. Historical perspectives are also important intergenerationally. Nostalgia is a political resource for coping, endurance and determination to find new ways of enacting these fundamental beliefs. And I am unapologetic about how nostalgic this presentation is actually going to be. So the first piece of work that I want to talk about is beautiful work by Annika Boren, one of the grand dames of New Zealand pottery, and we're lucky to own this piece. It was an early piece of Annika's work. It was a piece that was prepared for her very first exhibition, and we're delighted to have just hung this work in level 7 on Murphy, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. I need to, of course, situate myself into this research because, as Carmen said, in a way, this is also a tribute to the Karori campus, where many of us began our careers. Certainly I did. I joined in 2004, November 2004, and I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kindergarten teacher who wanted to change the world. I wanted to inspire students. I wanted to show them what good practice looked like, and I wanted to get involved in professional development because the college at the time ran some really good professional development programs for teachers. And so I was really excited to join. I actually wanted to be Mari Bassett, who was the early childhood art lecturer at the time. My hair was a bit wrong. She had this amazing hair that was sort of stuck up in a bun with chopsticks. She was terribly arty. But I soon fell in love totally with the campus and the people who were working there, who were so generous and kind to me. And I want to say at this point, Jane Winnie, who is here today, was my important mentor and who I love dearly because of that relationship that we had in terms of beginning to create some really exciting art programs for the early childhood students. I joined in November 2004. January 2005, oops, suddenly we weren't at the Wellington College of Education anymore. We were Victoria University of Wellington, and the landscape completely changed for me and many of my colleagues. But also, I think, in terms of the art collection, things changed for that as well. And as Carmen has mentioned, the collection has been owned and loved by Wellington Teachers College, where it was started in the 40s, 50s and 60s. Then it was loved by Te Whānau, Akupai, Wellington College of Education at Karori campus, and that was until 2016, and then the Faculty of Education, Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University, and soon the School of Education and the Faculty of Education, Health and Psychology. Yes, we think that that's a very good name for the new faculty. But, as I say, I want to go back in time and remember. One of the things that I absolutely remember, I'm an architect's daughter, and it stood out to me immediately, was the amazing building that the Karori campus was located in. It was the William Tumath building, a modernist, brutalist design, which I found utterly extraordinary, and I loved it dearly. Works were made specifically for this site, and the first one that I want to talk about was the Gai Nan. If you remember that wonderful modernist sculpture, it was made by Gai Nan for the college at no cost. The only thing he asked for was that the materials for the work be paid for. And in some ways, this is typical of the things that ended up in our collection. People were extremely generous in giving their time and their works to the college. And this piece of work is now actually here at Victoria, and you can see it from the library building if you look out over to the Cotton buildings, isn't it? And it's a wonderful piece of work. And of course, a metaphor for education, the acorn of education, you know, the seed that will grow and produce the fabulous tree of knowledge and all that sort of thing. This is another shot of a place that I used to love as you walked up the stairs to the library, which was such a lovely library. And as you walked into this atrium, you saw, again, work that was site-specific. This work behind me is actually those banners that you can see there hanging in the atrium, and they were made to create, to fill up the space, as Julia Traue said, who I was hoping she would be here. Julia was the librarian at the library for many years, and she said in an interview with her once that our walls have been enriched by paintings, prints and drawings, photographs and hangings, and other spaces enlivened by pottery, sculpture and plants. Julia has been my co-detective in this work, and she has often found people that I've been looking for and said, Lisa, here's the phone number, or here's the email. And it's been very exciting, and she's been delighted to be part of this journey, I think, with me. But you can see, you know, huge spaces, big concrete walls that needed to be kind of softened and made livable, and that's what the collection did. Talking about the building, this is the dance room, and as I think the building was the best artwork that we ever owned, actually. This is the dance room, and look at the mezzanine floor. Wow, where did that come from in somebody's mind? That was just the most extraordinary. I think it was Tutara or Rimu. It was just beautiful. And this is the last piece of work that the college bought, actually, from Tim Barlow. It was instituted, I think, by Jan Bowell, who wanted to have a piece of artwork that went down the stairs from the library to her magnificent dance studio. But again, as I say, I think the campus was an artwork in itself, and I celebrate that in this work. Another person who worked in the library for years and years was a woman called Margaret Clark. She worked in the library for 17 years. She's 92, and Julia found her phone number for me, and I rang her and talked to her. And she said that the thing about the college that she remembers was she would go out into the gardens from the library and sit in the Lopdal gardens and eat her lunch. And she would sit there, and sometimes she would draw. She said that the architecture at the college was so interesting that she loved to draw it. And she was into tapestry. And the piece of work that you can see on that side is her work that we still have of the bridges, which of course, and at this moment I burst into tears, is no longer. I mean, the thing that is so tragic really is that these buildings no longer exist. But they exist because we remember them, and they exist because of these beautiful pieces of artwork that capture some of the essences of the college. Very quickly, a little brief history of the collection. Things sort of started happening really around the 1950s as the students and the staff began to gift the college collection artwork, or they bought artwork for the collection. But also art was purchased from students at the exhibitions at the college. And I was thinking about this, and one of the things that I remember myself as an artist was the first time I ever sold a painting, and how amazing it was that somebody actually wanted to buy my work. And the college gave the students the opportunity to have that experience. And I think that was a really important and very validating thing that they did for the students. Works were often obtained by established artists and potters and local and emerging artists. They were very keen to support local emerging Māori and Pacific artists particularly. And one of the things too is that when you did that, you often got the works at a decent price as well, which was a very good investment on the college's part. Some of those works are now worth a fortune. I need to say that when we merged with Victoria, a lot of our collection was subsumed into the wider university collection. So we no longer have management of those pieces, but they are beautifully and gorgeously displayed around the campus at Kelburn and at Pipitea. And the thing about the Victoria collection is that they have money to look after these pieces in a way that we probably never could. So whilst at the time it was a bit awful, but now I'm completely reconciled to what has happened to those beautiful works. This is one of my favourite pieces, though. This is a little piece by Muriel Moody, and many of us who know the collection love this piece of work as much as I do, I think. And one of the things that I like, that in the library catalogue, they kept the most extraordinary notes of what they'd bought. They had references to magazines you could look up and books. But in this little note, it says, in handwritten writing, a gift from the artist to encourage the development of the collection. And because it was a public collection, a lot of the artists wanted their work on display. You know, it's good for them, good for their artistic reputations, but it was really good. They totally believed that students needed to be exposed to high quality works of art. and eclectic works of art as well, I have to say. Gosh, it's an amazing collection. The funds came from purchasing artworks from different sources, sometimes grants from staff and gifts of money from staff. Brian Carmody once gave a gift to the Arts Committee to buy work. Auctions of donated artworks. One of the people who stood out for me in the research was student Rod Graham in the 1960s, who's still an active potter in the Otaki community and a vibrant personality in the 60s. He's a dynamo, that guy. Wow. And of course, grants from the principal and the College Amenities Fund. There was a cost centre, and there was even a curator for a while. Those were the days. And conservation and maintenance money was sought from the College Amenities Fund. And at this point, I have to introduce Corinne Bernard, who has delightfully and wonderfully, Corinne, got a lovely little pamphlet for you as you go out the door, because one of the things that we need to do now is to look after the collection, and we are hoping that we will kind of get some donations, possibly from people who also think it is worthy of investment. So she will give you that as you leave. This is a piece by Heather Derbyshire, and you can see on that that clay sculpture was bought for $275. Probably a delight for Heather at the time of sale. She was a secondary school art student. What have we got in our collection? We've got 110 ceramic works, which is quite a few works, really. And I talked to Mark Hutchinson Pond at Webb's, who's the local auction house and dealer, who said, you have a treasure trove. And that was in the last couple of weeks, and that was very exciting to hear that news. And we have 140 artworks, different collected. Gosh, it's kind of a bit of a bonkers collection, but it's really kind of also very, I think, very endearing in lots of ways. There are some really sweet pieces in there. I don't quite get the pumpkins myself, but, you know, that was a thing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So paintings, prints, batik, fibre art, collage, and photographs. Lots and lots and lots of work. And the purpose of the collection? It wasn't just a teaching aid in demonstrating various techniques and art history for the art department, although the art department did use it. I used it quite a lot, especially as I began to investigate museum studies. I started using the collection a lot with students. But its subject content provides a teaching resource called on by all departments. It illustrates the artistic values of various cultures and provides pictorial images to supplement the written word. Take that, Erica Stanford, because one of the problems that is happening now is this kind of absolute reductionist approach, I think, to education, and it's squeezing. I think it has a danger of squeezing out the arts, but here it was totally considered a vital part of the students' education. One of the things that I talk about a lot in my work is how the environment can be considered a teacher. And certainly the college and the art collection created a really important learning environment that was enhanced very much by that collection. The collection itself was a teacher. But the thing that the collection suddenly didn't realise it was going to be doing was that it was going to help us transition to some new premises. The move to Waitiata Road in 2016, and then our recent move to Murphy and 18 Kelburn Parade in 2024. So it has had an important sort of function in helping us transition. But I just need to introduce Mrs. Jones to you, but Penny called her Mrs. Gunn. So Mrs. Gunn has had several names. Her real name is Josie, actually. That is the name that the artist Jill Gunn gave this piece of work. I've always called her Mrs. Jones. I think it's because on this bag, in her handbag, is a letter addressed to Mrs. Teddy Jones. So anyway, she has a multitude of names. She's also incredibly helpful, and she was helpful when we moved down to the aptly named by Mike Taylor, the tinny houses, and she helped us kind of figure out how to get around these odd buildings that we were suddenly found ourselves in. And yeah, she was useful, she was humorous, she was endearing. But as Pene alluded to, Mrs. Gunn, or Mrs. Jones, or Josie, first made an appearance for the faculty at Women and Gender Studies. And Alison Laurie was a great pal of Mrs. Jones. And when Gender and Women's Studies finally disappeared, Alison gave Mrs. Jones to us. And this year, Alison also passed. And so in some ways, this is a way of us, I think, remembering Dr. Alison Laurie, who, for me in my education as a teacher and an educationalist, was hugely important. So here's to you, Alison Laurie. I don't know whether we want to keep associating Mrs. Jones and Alison. I don't know whether she'd quite like that, but anyway, it's a tribute. She first appeared in a Wellington exhibition at the City Art Gallery, and it was called the Fabric Art Company Stuff Show. And I know that fabric art was a big thing. I'm sure Liz Melchior, you used to do a bit of fabric art. Sort of? Yeah, I'm sure you do. Anyway, I remember doing a bit myself. I used to do odd cushions based on Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. They were very, very strange things. Anyway, in 2016, I had an email conversation with Jill Gunn about the work. And I'll read you this because I think it's fantastic. And I know Bryony wants to know all about Mrs. Jones. In the 1980s, I was a member of a women's art group called the Fabric Art Company. We were all young mothers with a lot of children and a great passion for creating with fabric and fibres. We sparked together and were able to find the humour in our busy family lives and make that into many large fabric sculptures that were exhibited over about 5 years from 1983. In 1984, we entered a piece called Time Out in a New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts fabric and fibre exhibition, and we each made a character that was sitting on a park bench. Josie was included in this work, and we won the top prize that year. It was a big highlight for us all. Each character was for sale separately, and Josie was sold then, and all I recall was that she was bought by a professional man. And a few years later, I was called by some government department that was then on the terrace that had been gifted her by that man who was leaving the country. And I think that man then gifted it to Gender and Women's Studies. I had a great deal of fun making her and searched the lower hut op shops for her clothes and underwear. My workroom was in the front of our house, and as I was working on her body without a head, the doorbell went, and it was the local MP, John Terrace. He was rather shocked at first when he saw her headless body sitting on a chair. So she's always had that kind of rather crazy element. One of the things that we discovered at Waitiata Road is that we had a terrible problem with parking. It was awful, and often the cars would park on their pedestrian access, but Mrs. Jones was a guardian of our pedestrian access, and she would often sit there with a poster saying, "The blue is not for you." And the other thing that she did is she had a very interesting relationship with the parking warden, who at the time was rather taken with her. So a useful thing. Thank you, Mrs. Jones. So, as I said, the collection has helped us transition to Murphy in 2024, and the refurbishment of Level 7 gives you a taste of what we have in a collection. Sorry, that typo there. But one of the things that happened is that when we put the Anika Boren sculpture up, we thought, oh, that's pretty, lovely. And then Ali came along, my colleague Ali Glasgow came along and said, oh, I do think we need a plant to go with this piece of work. And so the next day, Ali came along with this gorgeous plant and a wonderful little stand for it. And then the next minute, Bronwyn rocks up and says, oh, I've got just the thing. And she presents us with these little gumboots, which are kind of odd. And we were just, what's this? And she said, I think the thing about these gumboots is that they were given to Bronwyn when one of our colleagues, John Dickey, was leaving the college. John was a very much esteemed colleague of ours. And he said to her, these gumboots always remind me of the purpose of education. We are here for the little ones, and we have to keep that in mind. And for us, I think that's a very beautiful kind of thing to keep in mind when we are doing our work and also thinking about the way we can use our collection to enhance our students' understanding of art and appreciation of art. So, I'm going to give you a taste of level 7. It is the envy of Murphy. Let's go. So you can see that the collection is wildly eclectic, but it does serve a really important purpose. So that's just a wee taste of where some of the paintings and prints have ended up. But one of the things that you might be wondering is, where did the ceramics collection go? And at this point, I want to talk about the collection as a teaching tool and show you where it is. But come up to the lab and see what's on the slab, and at this point Delwyn will break into the time warp. But one of the things that's fantastic is, when I told Delwyn that the art room was in KK 518, she said, "Oh my goodness, I used to work in that room. It used to be biological sciences. It used to stink," she said. It was where they did the dissections of fish. I worked with Professor Ken Ryan, and Ken is here as well today. And it used to be full of extraordinary specimens and objects. And I took a photograph of the type of thing that it probably was in that laboratory when Ken was there. That picture of all the beautiful, beautiful science objects that the students could study and, investigate. And those cupboards that now house our ceramics collection. Glass-fronted cabinets, which was so perfect for... And who would have even known that that's what we would discover? And I wanted to quickly show you too, for those of you who might be interested, that particular space as well. And you can see how the objects are so gorgeous in that room. That's the shower for the chemicals, isn't it, Ken? Fumidor. Mrs. Jones likes that room. So it is the most extraordinary room. When I walk in there, it's got such a palpable presence. Hiria described the idea of Māori, the essence of things embedded in places of them and objects. And when you walk into that room, you can just feel it sort of beaming out at me. And it's a rather beautiful thing working in that space with all these beautiful things around you. Bernard Leach, Mrs. Jones was our first acquisition, last acquisition, probably our first acquisition, were pots by an incredibly influential English potter called Bernard Leach. He wrote a very influential book called The Potter's Book that almost every potter in New Zealand used to clutch and read like a Bible. And he was very important in kind of conveying a sort of Anglo-Asian idea in terms of ceramics. But these works were donated to the college by a man called Ray Chapman Taylor. Now, Ray Chapman Taylor was a really important collector of ceramics in Wellington in around the 40s, 50s, and he totally believed that it was important that people got an opportunity to see these pots. Another interesting person who's helped me with my research is a man called Colin Davis. And the other day, Colin rang up and said, Lisa, you've got to talk about Ray Chapman Taylor. You've got to talk about Bernard Leach. Bernard Leach has to be the linchpin of your talk. And you've got to read Cone 10 down, page 61, because it's all in there. And I went, okay, Colin, this is really weird. I've just been to the library and got out Cone 10 down and been looking at page 61. And in fact, this is a quote from page 61 in that very book, because Ray Chapman Taylor said, "We hoped these pots would spread the gospel of Bernard Leach in a practical way, for although he has preached many sermons and in words, his best ones are in pots. These show us what he really means." And I was thinking about our whakatauki, that idea that artistic excellence makes the world stand up and wonder, and Bernard Leach pots were one of those things that Ray Chapman Taylor wanted to show Wellington potters. And he would open his house and let people come and study these amazing works of art. He was an educationalist as well. He really believed that children should have arts experiences, and he loved actually using ceramics, clay with children. So that was also an interesting discovery about Ray Chapman Taylor. And he, of course, was a good friend of this extraordinary woman. And I think in the room we may have a descendant of Doreen Blumart here, and it's a great honour. It's Suzanne, isn't it? Lovely to have you here, because she was the most extraordinary person, I think. It's funny, I feel her. I can feel her sort of guiding me in this research. She is somebody that I sort of identify with, even though I never met her. She has the energy, I think, that I really respond to. Anyway, Rachel Barrowman once wrote a book about the 119 years of creativity of Victoria, and she said in that book that Blumart was a central presence in the rich culture of creativity and creative arts that became the defining quality of Wellington Teachers College in the 50s and 60s, and has continued at Victoria's Faculty of Education. It is a history that deserves its own account. And I went, what? That's amazing. That's what this research actually does. So I was grateful to Rachel for making that kind of statement, I think, in that book. And here she is, the woman herself. She was a teacher. She became the interim head of the art department at Christchurch Teachers College, which incidentally was where Ray Chapman Taylor was the principal, or had been the principal. She taught at Waterloo School in the Hut, but one of the really important things I think about Doreen was that she became the National Art and Craft Advisor to implement programs in primary schools at BB's invitation. BB was a very significant educationalist, Department of Education, I think. So that the advisors, the arts advisors, were started with Doreen and continued for many years. And they were really significant for school teachers. Honestly, the people that I've talked that remember the art advisors coming in and saying how marvellous it was for enlivening their programs. In 1951, she was appointed the head of the art department, and she worked there for 20 years until she retired in 1971, when she became a full-time potter. One of the things that I read in a book by Marion McLeod was a description of her working with some inspectors in Auckland, running a workshop, probably a ceramics workshop with them. And because they loved the workshop so much, they gave her a leather handbag as a present and a little note in it saying, "Thank you so much, Doreen. You are a jet-propelled meteor." And actually, for me, that absolutely, from all the things that I was reading, I was thinking, gosh, that absolutely describes the kind of energy that she had to get her own way, actually, I think sometimes, to get the things that she wanted done. And I think that's an energy thing that Doreen had. It kind of resonates with me as well. I think that I have quite a lot of energy sometimes. Anyway, One of the things about Doreen was that she was searching for a New Zealand idiom in her own work, as many people and many artists at the time were. Pākehā artists were trying to figure out what was it, how was it that they could explain themselves through their arts in terms of being a New Zealander, and Doreen searched for that. But the thing that I wanted to show you was a little piece of film of Doreen talking about arts education. Now, this is quiet, so I hope you'll be able to hear her.
Used to have purple hair. It was quite amazing the difference in working with children and allowing children to really express their ideas. And, education means it's all outside. It's easy to push into. And we always have for children their ideas and so on. And each one of these has a wonderful lot to tell us if we will allow them to do so. And many of them can't do the words, so they're so simply in their illustrated painting.
I just think that sums it all up for me in terms of arts education. And those sentiments, I think, are things that we need to keep alive, because we're now in a situation where we're having, as I say, a very narrowing of government policy about what it means to educate young children, and that's a bit scary. Doreen believed that creative artwork would free children from the ideas of copying and rote learning, and that they would be freed to experiment in all aspects of their work and lives. So, Doreen and her colleagues and her potters, who were an amazing community. One of the things that I have learnt about potters are that they are the most extremely generous people. They are people who will share their ideas and techniques and discoveries with each other, and they've done for many, many years. But they were also looking very much for expertise and inspiration. And the college for a long time worked for the Wellington Potters Association. And because the Wellington Potters Association in the 70s, I think they were started in about 70s, they didn't have their own rooms. They couldn't do the things that they wanted to do. They wanted to get experts in, but they couldn't do it unless they, luckily, were able to use the Teachers' College. And we had brilliant facilities, and they worked with the head of the art department, the ceramics department, Laurie Lord then, and they would run these extraordinary workshops with international and renowned potters. One of them was a man called Professor Kondo. And in my research, I was lucky enough to interview Bill, who remembers him from when he was a student. And he said, Professor Kondo came from Japan, and I remember it quite well because he was prepping for his workshop at the college for quite a few days prior. And that's amazing. These students had access to these international celebrities in the pottery world. It wasn't just Kondo, there was another Japanese potter with him, Miyashita. They got this impressive electric wheel which was foot operated, and because Kondo sat cross-legged, as the Japanese did, they had to work out something, and they got an engineer involved and rigged a gear stick lever for an accelerator. He did bowls with white slip, and he had a sort of wheel with arms on it that went round and cut the slip to make those patterns. He'd throw the pot and demonstrate how to put on the slip, and then he'd dance this little wheel around it, making grooves on the slip. That's the middle image there. It had cowboy-like spurs on it, and everybody was on the edge of their seats. You know, this was absolute groundbreaking stuff, and recently I was lucky enough to have a lesson on how to do that by Professor Ken Ryan, who's also a potter, and it's a really fantastic technique. Moving away slightly from ceramics back to our painting and prints collection, this is the oldest piece of work that we have in our collection, and it is the most gorgeous thing. I've always loved it. It's by Utagawa Hiroshige, who was born in 1797 in Tokyo. the work was made in 1832. You know, that's 8 years before the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. It's extraordinary to think that we own such an old and beautiful piece. It has faded a lot, but look how that blue is still so striking. The other thing about this work that I think is delightful is the fact that it has 2 poems about this particular subject, the bonito, which is a very important fish for the Japanese. Look at the colour of the first bonitos. They are as blue as morning glories. No wonder they come along to market before the sun rises. And the first bonito caught on the beach near the place called Under Snow melts like snow in my mouth. How tasty it is. So you can just imagine it, can't you? That sort of, you know, the amazing sort of sensation of the new bonitos coming through and being celebrated in this extraordinary piece of work. It has been chewed by worms a bit, apparently, because I have been talking to an American dealer who specialises in this work. It's semi-valuable, I'd say, but it has faded a lot. But it is a delightful work, I think. I think that it was probably bought in a market somewhere. Might have been, it says on there, original, bought in Tokyo and checked by several independent artists, etc. So one of the things that I know that the art lecturers at the college often did was they would go off on their international tours and they would buy prints, particularly prints that reflected the culture that they were visiting. And I think probably they were easy things to buy because you could roll them up and pop them in your suitcase and then you could bring them back to New Zealand and frame them. And I think, and this is what the American dealer suggested too, that it was probably picked up in a market somewhere. And £9, pretty good price. One of the things that the college was really known for was the rich and interesting trips for students that were provided, and a lot of the work that you saw in Level 7, I think, probably reflects some of that. A lot of the trips were to Rarotonga, and they also went to Australia, and sometimes they went to Indonesia. And it was an incredibly important thing in those days for the students to have off-campus experiences, for them to build relationships with one another, but also the communities that they were visiting. And one of the people who particularly loved doing this was a guy called George Kogis. George Kogis was an American, and he arrived in New Zealand in the sort of late 70s and ended up at the Teachers College for a couple of years. Some of you may recognise that ceramic sculpture that's just near the quad at Victoria. That was commissioned by Tim Beaglehold, actually. And I think this description of the work by Sharon Taylor Offord, who also helped me with this research, was that it provides a visual link between the towers of learning on the hill and those of commerce below. I think it's rather marvellous, that description. But George presented much less traditional ideas about ceramics, and the other thing was that he was absolutely adored by the students. And his pots have sometimes been described as a bit wonky, and it was kind of his style. He was a hand builder. He let the students have a lot more freedom with the way they created things, instead of kind of making everybody do 4 identical cylinders on the wheel. He was much more about students being expressive and using hand-built techniques. For him, those experiences outside of the college were really important, and this was, I think, a significant trip that George made with his students to Tokomaru Bay to visit his friend Helen Mason, who was a potter who was working up on the East Coast, and had created a relationship with Auntie Noi Peiwharangi, who many of you will know probably wrote that amazing Wāta Poie. And he developed an incredibly good relationship with her. And he said, I shared an office with Tiffany O'Regan, who said to me, if you go to Tokomaru Bay, you better take some Māori with you. And he said it in such a way that it was clearly a package deal. So they took as many students as they could from the college art department who were associated with Māori studies. And I interviewed one of the students who went along with them, And she said it was the most extraordinary experience being able to share their skills with the people from that marae and being taught things in return from that community. It was an extraordinary reciprocal relationship. And for Tipene O'Regan, those things were incredibly important because a lot of the students in those days had very little to do with Māori, and especially Māori in their communities. And so it was a very much encouraged thing. You can see the young George in the back of that black and white photograph with the beard. And I was hoping Jenny Shearer was going to be here today too, because Jenny is another grand dame of New Zealand pottery who also went on that trip with George. I think probably one of the most interesting parts of this research is discovering ngā kaihanga uku. Now, we Taipa, who made that small pot that we have in our collection, was a really good friend of George Kogis, and he was also a student of George's in Whanganui after George left the Teachers' College and went and worked in Whanganui. We Taipa was one of the first people who established ngā kaihanga uku, and they came together in 1986, and they were driven to make artworks with clay based on ideas from kaupapa Māori. Now, one of the really interesting things was that people always said Māori didn't have a tradition in ceramics making. They had lots of different forms of art, but ceramics, didn't have it. However, further investigation into this and a book by Bay Riddell, a recent publication, is an interesting kind of swing on this idea of no ceramics tradition. Because he says our forebears did employ ceramic technologies, but this knowledge was left behind as they migrated across Te Moana Nui a Kiwa towards the rising sun. To us, it is as though those lapita tipuna have reached from their time and reality into ours to renew a lost connection and to help us realise our identity in clay. So the voyage to New Zealand meant that some of this tradition was lost. Probably migration meant that they needed lighter vessels to carry food and perhaps found different ways to cook food. But again, Māori, just as the Pākehā potters were beginning to look for the New Zealand idiom, Māori potters were also beginning to explore the possibilities for them in terms of what this material, this art form could do for their work. If you ever want to see examples of this fantastic stuff, go to the Quartz Museum in Whanganui. It is a gem of a museum, and it has some wonderful examples of all of those potters' work in that exhibition. Just the final, I think, piece of work that I want to talk about. How are we doing for time, Carmen? Are we all right? Okay. Was this wonderful collaborative ceramic mural called Ukupaka. Do you remember this work? It used to grace the entryway at the Karori campus. And it was a collaboration that was organised by Anne Wilson, who was a very passionate teacher and absolutely passionate about ceramics. And she and Doreen were involved in making this mural, and they did it by drawing up this big picture and gridding it into different parts, and students would each get a part and they would make it. And it was a collaborative work, and it was extraordinary. I talked to one of the students who was involved in that, and he said it was amazing being involved in such incredible collaborative work. And he said the other thing that was really good was it was an elective, and we were allowed to go and do it. It was worth about 20 credits, and we'd just do this work, and then we'd get points for it. And that was the thing about the college. They were able to do these rather extraordinary things. They weren't constrained by many of the things that we find now. So there's the mural. I always thought it was the three baskets of knowledge, the story of the three baskets of knowledge. And it is, but it's more than that, because there are three panels, and you can see this is the de-installation of the mural as they pulled it out of Karori. It's a huge thing, but it is definitely done in three different panels. The first panel is representing the beginning of life for the students at the College of Education. And it connects with the ideas of growth, the trees and the ferns, the symbol that recognises growth that starts to occur for the students as they begin their training. The second panel does deal with the story of the baskets of knowledge, and the third panel symbolises the multicultural aspect of the college. So there was quite a lot going in this work that spoke very much about the kaupapa of that place and the ideals, if you like, of that particular place. And where is it now? Well, for a long time, it was in storage. But, ta-da! Thank you, Sophie Thorne, for organising such a beautiful spot for this work to now grace the walls of the Hugh Mackenzie building. And I'm hoping that the School of Education will be able to start using some of those lecture theatres more often over in that particular part of the university. And it just looks amazing. Honestly, it just pops out of that wall, and it's absolutely stunning, and I'm delighted that we now have it amongst us again. No, this is the last story. This was Matthew, and Matthew's story was so incredibly moving that it just made me think, God, we've got to keep doing this stuff. He had really huge problems when he was a student. He had terrible illness in his family, he had a new wife who had a baby. It was just dreadful for him. And he said, I had such a shattered mind. There's a huge relief in doing something palpable with your hands, making things. It's a way of not being caught up in the circles of your mind, the torturous stuff. That's the relief in it. And of course, because it's creative, you could actually work your way through it, find out about yourself and what living is like, and embed it into that pot. I'm absolutely convinced it is as important as shelter and food, those sorts of things, being creative in whatever you're creative in. Be in that as much as you can be. And I just thought it was so profound. And he loved being there, and he would stay late at night and he would work out so much in that extraordinary art room. And I'm very aware that we only have a few minutes left, but I do think that art education can and should embody an ethic of care, and as such be an integral part of our education programs. It's not all about literacy and numeracy. It's also about literacies in other areas. The arts are hugely important in young children's education. Daryl said that she thought that what gave the college its vitality was the value that was given to the arts and the enthusiasm of the lecturers, many of whom were recognised off campus for their contribution to the arts. And the college certainly drew in some extraordinary people who were extraordinary teachers. And we know that arts education has suffered huge body blows over the last 10 or so years, and it's just like being squeezed. It's awful. But one of the things that I hope that this may inspire us to look to the past so that we can be informed about the future, as Carmen said. Kia mua, kia muri. So that the young ones, like Jack, can have the kinds of education that we want them to have. We need to make sure that arts education is a valued part of the ECE curriculum and the school curriculum. And art education, I think, for me, is not just about creating art, it's also about learning how to appreciate it. And so advocacy for the arts and arts education is vital. And that, my friends, is that, except that it takes a village to raise a child, and a village certainly helped raise this baby. And thank you to everybody who's been so amazingly generous with their support. And Mrs. Jones now invites you to party.
And party we shall, but not before. A few words of thanks. I think you heard Lisa say a bit under her breath, oh, I think I might have a little bit of that energy, as we all chuckled. Sometimes I refer to Lisa as a force of nature, and she is. She enters her teaching space, her art room, the lecture theatre, a museum or cafe, her office, my office, with the impact of a rolling wave that catches you unawares. And she carries you with it to heights of interest in the arts that you would never have otherwise contemplated. She is an artist at heart, and she brings that heart to everything that she does. Her students, her colleagues love the way she stretches them to try new ways to explore their creativity, as she resources them with the skills and materials to unlock their freedom of expression. Thank you, Lisa. She's woven a presentation with visual and verbal narratives that brought together scholarly insight, artistic appreciation, and a considerable dose of humor. Please join me in thanking Lisa for her lecture. Now, we were supposed to have questions, but I think we'll have them in the foyer over the party. But I think... Lovely, Ewaiata. Gahi katea, he whakapaiururoa, afi mai afi atu, tātou tātou e, tātou tātou e. Ngā mihi. 30 we shall. Please join us in the foyer and ask your questions to Lisa there. Thank you all. Well done, you.
Also, if you ever want a tour of the art room, you can ring me.